So, Julia, I invited you here today. You're regular here.
Yeah.
For those that have never met you, tell us what's normal life like for you before we get to a very abnormal day.
Okay, so I'm retired. I keep quite busy. I do regular things on regular days, so I like a bit of routine. I've got a good group of friends. I go to the gym. I love gardening, and I live at home on my own with 2 little dogs.
Okay, so that's normal life for you. Home alone with 2 little dogs, and I do remember even on the 12th you were doing some of the things you like to do.
I was
you were
gardening.
And you were painting your fence, I think.
Yes.
I think the paint was green.
Yes.
Yes, I remember, because I saw that, because you were still
covered in it.
Yes, so there we are. So that was normal, but the 12th was not a normal day for you at all. Tell us what happened on September the 12th.
Right. I just finished painting the fence and had gone in, and my phone was going, and I have a different ringtone for each of my family.
I think you might be fading in and out. Is that better? Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew's just signalled a big thumbs up. So
Okay.
if you stand there, if I do that, that's going to pick you up.
Right. So I've got a different ringtone for each of my family, so I knew it was my son-in-law that was ringing me. And when I answered it, he didn't seem to be talking to me. He was talking to somebody else. And so I was shouting, Dan, you've accidentally rang me. Your phone must be in the pocket. And then all of a sudden Dan said, Julie, get here now. And I went, what? And he said, get here now. Rhiannon has gone into cardiac arrest and they are working on her. So I only live 2-minute drive from my daughter. So I got in the car and I had this vision that Dan had got it wrong. I was going to go in the house and Rhiannon was going to be being sorted out by the medics saying that she'd fainted. But when I got in, Rhiannon was in fact dead. She was being worked on. They did 12 defibrillators on her. I got there within 11 minutes of it happening. The ambulance, these are all the amazing things that happened. Rhiannon usually works it in her office, which is North Bristol, on a Thursday. This was a Thursday. But she decided she wasn't feeling quite right, hadn't been for a couple of days, so she decided to work from home. And 5 o'clock, Dan, her husband, come home, saw her in the office on a conference call, went to sort the cat out, and then he heard a thud. He went in, found her. So Dan was thankfully at home. Rhiannon thankfully wasn't driving home. All these things God has put in place for it to happen as it did. The ambulance only took 4 to 5 minutes to get there. I got there exactly the same time as the air ambulance crew got there. They took 11 minutes to get from Almondsbury to Knowle. They went the wrong side of the road so that because it was rush hour traffic, it just gone 5. So when they came into Bristol, where the underpass is, they decided, as there was a queue of traffic, to go the wrong side and hope that they didn't see any of their cars coming, which they didn't.
They came right up the hard shoulder, didn't they?
Yeah.
So instead, they drove the wrong way up the hard shoulder to get there as quickly as possible, because it was rush hour. I mean, to put it in perspective, when we went the other way back to the BRI, it took us about 40 minutes to get into town at that time of night. And they got there in how many minutes?
11 minutes.
11 minutes.
So they got there. As I got in there, I went into the kitchen and saw that they were shocking her. They did it 12 times. And it took, they put a Lucas machine on her after about 3/4 of an hour because they wanted to take her from the home, where she was still not breathing or her heart wasn't even beating, to get her into the hospital. So they used the Lucas machine to do a constant pushing onto her chest to keep her heart pumping. And then they can then get her into the hospital. Now it took an hour before Rhiannon's heart started to beat. And in that time, she was dead. And then,
Well, that was exactly what you said to me, because I'd got in from work on a Thursday,
yeah,
about 5 o'clock, and my phone rang, and it was Julie. And Julie's first words to me, you were crying down the phone, were, my daughter's just died. And I was doing my calculations, and obviously you've got 2 daughters, one I know well, one I know less well, but I know them both. And Rihanna's only 39, isn't she?
Yes, she
She's
is.
young, she'd been seemingly in good health. This was a complete bolt from the blue. And so that was our expectation. I remember we pulled up on the street, there were 3 ambulances outside your house as Susan and I arrived, and another one just sped past us. And we then found out from you they'd just taken Rhiannon, but her heart still wasn't beating, even as they loaded her into the ambulance.
So it took an hour and then another 2 hours before her heart would work itself. So she was on life support for 3 days. She was in an induced coma. Now, when this was first happening and I was there, I could see that there was nothing I could do. I was her mother. I couldn't do anything, which is a horrible feeling. But I could see everyone, the medics were doing everything they could, and I knew the only thing that I could do was to get as many people to pray as possible, which is why I'd rang Neil. And Neil kindly offered with Susan to come over and be with me. And that was wonderful in itself, that I knew that Neil was getting in touch with people to pray. I did not expect that God was going to grant my wish in the fact that Rhiannon wouldn't die. I know that we live in a very fallen world and that things go wrong in this world that we can't understand. But all I wanted is for people to pray, and whatever the outcome was, I would go with whatever God wanted. Thankfully.
Stop there. That is true. Julie said that right from the off. Not just when, things looked incredibly bleak. Well, Susan and I we drove back about midnight, didn't we, that night?
Neil took me home.
The doctors were all teeing us up for bad news. They reckoned they could get Rhiannon stable for 10 minutes, which they did, for you to go and visit. That was it. But in the midst of that, this mother loves her children. And yet right from the off, Julie said, I just want God's will here to be done. I want his people praying. I know what I want, but I want his will to be done. Don't miss that here this morning. That is a statement of incredible faith. Most people don't land there originally. It takes years sometimes to believe that God has done the right thing. Sometimes we never really believe that. We find it really hard. But in that instant, Julie's faith just shone. And I was incredibly blessed. Sorry, Julie, I've interrupted your story. So things are bleak at this point.
Yeah, so
the doctors are rushing around. Rhiannon's in a coma, induced coma for 3 days of recovery.
when they said that they were going to take her out of the coma, they prepared us that it might not be as we wanted it to be. There might be brain damage because of the amount of time that she'd been not breathing. But when she started to come out of the coma, I went in and seen her, and I was grateful that I was able to just say, Rhiannon, I love you so much. And she nodded. And then, as they took away the whatever they were doing to keep her under, she came round, and she was still Rhiannon. She still is Rhiannon. She hasn't had any brain damage from this. She's fighting fit, almost, tired a lot. They've fitted a defibrillator internally so that should this happen again, because they still don't know why it happened, they're going to do genetic testing to see if it's in the family. But Neil had said to me, did I feel better when we were coming home and I'd seen her? And at that point, he said, do you feel better for seeing her? I said, no, because I still didn't believe that she was going to live. But God's been very gracious, and she's still with us. And she knows that I'm talking to you about this today. She said she believes, there was a couple of night nurses that spoke to her about, do you know that God has created a miracle here? And she actually believes it too. So
it really is an incredible thing. Just recap the details here. A 39-year-old collapses at home after work. She stops breathing, her heart stops beating. It takes an hour for the heart to restart. The doctors tee the whole family up. They very kindly let Susan and I sit in these meetings. Susan's medical, so she was very useful.
very.
Yeah, in terms of repeating stuff back. But, you know, it looked incredibly bleak. Even if she lived, would she have brain damage or other damage? And I remember when she started to come round and Julie said, I think she's still in there. I think she understands. And Susan and I were wondering, is this just a mum wanting to see the best? And I loved the moment where you said she came round and she was bossing you around.
Yeah,
she would do normally.
exactly the same.
And then they said to her, do you think you're strong enough to get out of bed? And you said she did 5 laps round the ward on
Yep.
the Zimmer frame straight on that day.
After the 4th day, the medical team said Rhiannon, they couldn't work it out themselves, but Rhiannon was 200% ahead of where she should have been at that point.
And doctors and paramedics kept popping in to
Yes.
see her, because they don't normally get to see this either.
Mark and Julian were the 2 air ambulance crew, and they came in a couple of times this year. And in fact, Mark was one of the doctors that worked on Rhiannon to fit the defibrillator. So he got to see Rhiannon then, and Rhiannon and Dan are going to go out to see them because it also boosts them to see what they've done.
Yes, it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. Julie, even before you knew Rhiannon was going to be well, God had done something massive
Yes.
in your heart.
He did.
Are you happy to talk about that?
I
here this
am,
morning?
and Harry knows that I'm going to talk about this.
Yeah.
So I was married for 32 years, but after about 22 years, my husband had an affair. We stayed together for another 10 years, but it didn't work out. And he ended up back with the woman that he had the affair with. Now, that was 24 years ago. And I carried a very dirty hatred for her. So much so that when it was Harry's wedding, Rhiannon's wedding, the dedication of Tegan at the church, she was not allowed to come to any of them because of my hatred of her. On this occasion when I got there first, then my ex-husband got there. And he said he went to go back out the house, and I said to him, where are you going? And he said to tell Amanda not to come in. And in that instant, God took that hatred away. And I said, no, it's done. She can come in. And the blessing that God has given to me through that act that he has asked me to do to get rid of that hatred is tenfold. My family life is easier for the family. They don't have to keep us apart anymore. And my granddaughter, who knew of my hatred of her, said, is it true, Mama, that you and Manny were in a car together? And I said, yeah, it's done. But in that, I have held on to that hatred for 24 years, and I've never been able to get rid of it. But in that instant, God said, enough, and he took that away from me.
It's an amazing thing. It's easy to look around a church like this and think, I am the only one in here who's not sorted. Everyone else here is good. Everyone else has understood life. Everyone else has somehow made it work, and I can't. Can we say that in this church we welcome those who are broken, those who are struggling, those for whom life is too much? There is actually no other way to come to Jesus. He didn't come for the righteous, the Bible says, but for the sick. For those who know they're unwell in their heart of hearts and need him. So Julie's story isn't just a story of triumph, it's a story of grace. over decades and change over decades. God has a long-term plan for our lives that's different to ours. And even when it doesn't seem it, it's better. Julie, I'm going to ask you one more question, then you can go and sit back down. I always ask people the same question every single time when I finish an interview with them, because I always want to know the answer to this one question. What is the best thing for you about being a Christian?
Okay, so this isn't all sugar-coated and sweet. I suffer greatly with my mental health and have done since I was a child. I can't make sense of this world many a time, and sometimes my life is very dark, and sometimes of my own making, sometimes that other people have made it that way for me. The only thing that makes sense to me is that Jesus Christ is my Saviour, that everything that is written in the Bible is true, and this world is horrible at times, absolutely horrible, but to know that this will end, and there will be this wonderful place that I will go to be with Jesus, and that just makes it easier for me to cope.
Thank you, Julie. Let's give Julie a clap.